LAX, 9:48 p.m., the air is thick as cigarette smoke. Her heels clicked on the marble like a countdown clock, click, click. In the stifling late night at Los Angeles International Airport, amid the tired crowds and the wan fluorescent lights, Veronica Ellison, 53, the newly installed FBI director, walked as if nothing around her existed. No bodyguards. No flags. No introductions. Just presence. The ash-gray suit was carefully tailored, unobtrusive, unadorned, but carried the air of a woman accustomed to giving orders without raising her voice. Her black hair was tied back, so neatly that every strand seemed to obey. In her left hand she held a leather briefcase, an inseparable object containing documents that even the president could only see through firewalls. She had just flown in from Seattle, tired, headachy, but alert. It was the only thing she allowed herself after a long day. All she wanted was to sink into the back seat of the black SUV, listen to the steady hum of the air conditioner, and close her eyes for 15 minutes of silence before a new day of meetings and decisions. She passed gate 23 and saw them, 2 airport security officers. White, in their 30s. She didn't look directly at them, didn't change her stride, but her eyes, trained over decades, took it all in, the quick glance, the slight elbow bump, the barely noticeable nod. They thought they were subtle. They'd never met Veronica. "Excuse me, ma'am," said the voice behind her. She stopped. Turned around. Not out of fear, but because she needed to know. "Where are you going at this hour?" one asked, her voice thick with a southern drawl, almost soft. "What's the matter?" Her voice was quiet, but it made all 3 of the women pushing carts nearby look up. "It's a minor matter, ma'am," the other interrupted, her hand hovering near her waist, too close to her gun. "You fit the description." She tilted her head. "What description?" "Middle-aged black woman. Gray briefcase. Possibly carrying sensitive documents." "You mean?" "I fit the description of a federal agent just off duty, on her way to the hotel." Her voice cooled by half a degree. "We'll need to check your briefcase," the other said, taking a step toward her. She squeezed the handle. The veins on the back of her hand stood out. "You may not be aware," she said, pulling papers from an inside pocket of her jacket, "I'm Veronica Ellison, director of the FBI." The air around them suddenly stopped. No one laughed. A man stopped tapping on his phone, a girl with an earpiece took one off. The first officer glanced at the card, then didn't touch it. "Who knows, anyone can print a badge today." "He's joking," the second interjected, but the forced smile didn't hide the awkwardness. Veronica stood still, unblinking. "I don't need to wave anything. I confirm, according to protocol." "Protocol is not up to you," the first said, suddenly serious. "We're taking you in for questioning." There was a moment of dead silence. Then Veronica smiled very slightly. Not sarcastically. Just the kind of smile of someone who's seen too much. "You're going to do that," she said, "while the whole of America is watching you take the FBI director in for questioning for carrying a gray briefcase." A voice rang out behind them, "What's going on?" "I'm live streaming." A middle-aged woman held up her phone. The screen was glowing. Veronica turned around, nodding slightly. The 2 officers looked at each other. Neither moved. Sweat began to seep into their collars. And in the oppressive silence, power no longer needed to be demonstrated. It just needed to be recognized. Grand Central Terminal, 6:43 p.m. Cold rain poured down on the glass dome, reflecting the red neon lights of the store signs outside. Inside, people were hurrying, their shoes echoing through the halls. But in the middle of the crowd, Veronica stood still, a stillness in the flow. She didn't shake. She didn't speak. Only her lips pressed together, as if locking in a storm inside. Her eyes scanned the curious crowd of photographers, the hidden cameras hidden behind their phones, and then stopped on 2 men in black suits, headphones in their ears, their eyes alert. A deep breath. A simmering fear crawled up her throat. But Veronica didn't let it rise to the surface. Call your Homeland Security liaison. Or, better yet, your supervisor. Now. The words rang out like an order, not loud, but as sharp as a thin blade. They didn't move. One, younger, with slightly trembling fingers, reached for her briefcase. She took a step back. Not quickly, not hastily. Just one. Don't touch that. You don't have the authority to search my property. Her voice wasn't loud, but the noise around her seemed to recede a half beat. The situation shifted like a slap. The two men stepped forward, saying nothing. No one spoke up. They gave no orders. But they surrounded her. Veronica didn't struggle, nor did she extend her hand. She stood motionless, as if her body were a marble wall and they were the rushing water. You're making a terrible mistake. Her words echoed in the empty chapel. No one answered. One of the two, the older one, grabbed her left arm, twisting it behind her back. The metallic clank rang like a verdict. The briefcase fell from her hand. The impact on the stone floor was so loud that a group of students nearby turned to look. A phone rang in the crowd, but no one answered. No one dared. The air in Grand Central was so thick it felt like breathing glass dust. Veronica did not bow her head as the cold handcuffs locked around her wrists. Instead, she stood straighter, her eyes never leaving the man who had cuffed her. Do you know what you are doing? She asked, her voice even and sharp. You are illegally detaining a federal agent. On American soil. The younger one snorted. His name tag read M. Landry. We are protecting the station. If you continue this attitude, your lawsuit will go nowhere. The camera began to zoom in, like a forest of artificial eyes. But Veronica did not look at them. Her eyes were still locked on the two men in front of her. I have shown my badge. I have made it clear who I am. I am not resisting. But if you do not verify my identity, do not contact your superiors. She paused, not in fear, but in anger. You are walking into a landslide that you do not have the strength to escape. Ma'am, you are finished, Landry snapped, then gestured. They escorted her to a nearby bench. Veronica sat down, stiff as steel, her hands still cuffed. Her briefcase lay on the floor. Abandoned. Her coat had been pulled off her left shoulder. A button was undone. But her gaze remained unwavering. Wait, she's the FBI director. A woman's voice rang out from the crowd. No one answered. But eyes began to move. The shutters became more frantic. Someone had started live streaming. Landry bent down, picking up the ID card that had fallen to the ground. His eyes paused. His jaw clenched. Devon. He whispered. The older man snatched the card. His eyes scanned the photo. The embossed seal. The barcode. The words, Bureau of Investigation, Level 7 clearance. He turned back to Veronica. This time, there was no hardness, no command. There was only one question, so small it was almost unspoken. Where did you get this? Veronica raised her head. It was issued to me. After 28 years of service to this country. She spoke, her voice low and firm, her eyes locked on his as if it were a command, same profession. Probably learned the same material. But the people who trained you, they're the people I've evaluated. Landry took a half step back, showing signs of hesitation for the first time. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, his gaze wavering as if searching for an escape. You could, just say I said that 5 minutes ago, she interrupted, each word tapping against the cold floor. And then I showed you the proof. You didn't care. Because you decided to believe what you wanted to believe. She didn't shout. But those nearby heard. Landry looked around. The central hallway of the building was filling with people, security guards, administrative staff, even a few wide-eyed interns. A few of the internal security guys were coming over, clearly not happy to see a doorman abandon his duties to just stand there and watch. Devon opened his mouth as if to say something, but then a cold voice rang out in his earpiece. Code 542. Agents on the way, DHS on scene on level B. He froze, his eyes shifting to Landry. What's code 542? A young agent asked quietly. Devon swallowed. High priority. Special agents, usually the type of people you don't want to upset. Veronica didn't say anything, but she leaned in, as if the slightest touch would set her off. Instead, she exhaled. Soft. Cold. Like ice cutting through the air. It's okay, she said. No words were needed. Landry slid the handcuffs off her wrists, fumbled with the key, and dropped it. The clang of metal against tile echoed embarrassingly. He bent down to pick it up. It's just formality, ma'am, he muttered. She rubbed her wrist, her eyes never leaving his. You need to stop saying, ma'am, like it erases everything you've done. Devon took the briefcase, intending to hand it to her, but she didn't extend her hand. No touching classified material without authorization. Her voice was as light as the wind, but his hand froze in midair. The whole hallway held its breath. Veronica straightened, adjusting the lapels of her coat, not too fast, not too slow, as if she were on a podium and not surrounded by a crowd. She looked straight at them both, her gaze piercing their armor. I hope your chain of command is better prepared. Either way, it's too late. No agents appeared. No press. No flags or official statements. But the humiliation, silent and profound, was still there. Her wrists were free now, but the mark of the handcuffs remained, a thin red ring around her skin. She clenched her hands, then unclasped them. She didn't groan. But she felt it. Devon wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. Landry kept muttering to himself, whether it was a curse or an apology. They didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. The atmosphere in the building changed. From curiosity to tension. People weren't filming secretly anymore. They were doing it openly. They were waiting. Waiting to see what the handcuffed woman would do next. Veronica bent down, picked up the briefcase herself, dusted it off. The latch was still on. She snapped it shut, gently, as if sealing a warning. And then, a voice cut through the frozen air. Excuse me, guys, what exactly is going on here? The black man, in his 60s, stood there in a faded denim jacket, his hair graying. He was straight, his eyes sharp, and he had something the others lacked, unwavering conviction. This woman is the director of the FBI, he said, as if reading from a statement. And I know it. I saw her testify on C-SPAN last week before the Judiciary Committee. You dragged her down like she was a thief. But she has more value in one coat pocket than you both have in your careers. Veronica looked at him, her eyes still hard, but something had softened. Not gratitude, recognition. Like people who are used to standing alone, and occasionally, meeting in the middle of a storm. Geneva International Conference Center. Outside a closed conference room where the diplomatic representatives had just finished their work. Veronica walked out of the conference room, still clutching the sealed file. The air smelled of coffee and the rain had just stopped. People were murmuring in different languages, but she was as silent as a cut in space. Landry followed, his eyes constantly scanning the corners of the hallway, a small, almost invisible listening device in his ear. No one said anything. But they all knew, the game had begun. Devon approached from a distance, his jacket neatly tucked in, his face as if he were just passing by. He pretended to adjust his watch, then the radio at his hip. We're being followed, Devon whispered, not looking at anyone. There's a car waiting outside. No license plate. Lights off. Veronica didn't answer. She just squeezed the file. Then a Latina woman in a navy uniform appeared, her figure trim, her steps measured. The TSA badge was on her chest. "Ma'am," she said, her voice soft but not without concern. "I sincerely apologize. We have not received any formal notification of an arrest warrant. This is not procedure." Veronica turned, her gaze calm but sharp enough to cut through the fog in the room. "You do not need to apologize for their mistake." The words rang out like metal on glass. The TSA agent turned to the two plainclothes officers behind her. "You just touched a high-ranking federal official without verification." She refused to cooperate. Devon interrupted quickly, his voice strained. "I comply," Veronica said, loud enough for those nearby to turn to look. "I verified my identity. I showed my identification. I didn't yell, I didn't protest. I asked to be called to verify, and they refused." The air thickened. It was as if the entire hallway had been sucked of oxygen. "We'll need to report it immediately," the TSA agent said, her face now urgent. Before anyone could react, another voice rang out, sharp, clear, leaving no room for doubt. "A cut is unacceptable. Director Ellison." A man in a black suit walked quickly forward, wearing a headset. Behind him were two Homeland Security agents, moving like water through the crowd. One approached Veronica, tilting his head. "Ma'am, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied. Then she turned and pointed at the two officers, "But they're not." "Stand down," the agent said, not loudly but enough to send a chill down everyone's spine. Landry almost melted into the floor. Devon looked at the surveillance camera in the corner of the room, then looked down at his polished shoes. The agents began to work like a choreographed piece. One took a statement from the TSA agent. Another confirmed Veronica's identity via biometrics. There was silence. But not the empty kind. The silence that followed a mistake that had just been exposed. "I want all security data pulled right away," the lead agent said. "Body cameras. Corner of the hallway. And someone from Internal Affairs, wait for them when they get off." Devon muttered, "This is crazy." An older black man stood next to him, looking at him like he was a child seeing chess for the first time. "You're crazy to think you can treat her like a normal black woman, and not have anyone notice your silence." Veronica straightened. She adjusted her briefcase strap. "No need to say anything more." "I want to leave," she said. The agents nodded. "We'll escort you." She didn't look back. No one called her name. The cameras were still recording. But her silence wasn't forgiveness. And they knew it. The walk from the conference to the SUV parked outside was longer than she'd ever walked. The agent beside her didn't speak, didn't ask. Didn't fill the void. Because he knew, sometimes, silence was part of the game. Inside the car, Agent Sonia Delvecchio was waiting. Her face was stern, sharp. "I'm not hurt," Veronica said before she asked. Her voice was calm, only her eyes were tired. But the fatigue didn't come from the body. It came from constantly remembering, this game was never fair. And she, still had to win. Sonia stared down at her wrists, the red marks where the security strap had tightened still barely fading. She turned away, trying to contain her shaky breath. "I sent an emergency report, as soon as the signal came in," she said, her voice low but clear, as if defending herself more than anyone else. On the screen surrounding the command room, 3 different angles of the incident were being replayed, slowed down, analyzed. The sound of reporters screaming outside drifted in through the bulletproof glass. The terminals were flashing in a frenzy of news. Veronica stood tall, unfazed. "Let them see," she said, her chin lifted. Sonia just nodded, slowly, as if agreeing but also carrying an extra layer of gravity. "They're doing damage control," Sonia continued, her eyes on the flashing red alert light. The internal situation has been isolated. The task force is de-intercepting the media. Veronica shook her head slightly. Soon, they'll know, that's not my concern. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Not anymore. Sonia was silent for a long moment before she spoke again, softer, almost apologetic. The third time in 4 months, Director. First the safety elevator at Langley. Then the identity verification error at the Denver meeting. Now this. Veronica turned to look at her. The look wasn't reproachful, just a kind of cold acceptance. I keep the records. And Sonia, that video, and it comes with a receipt. Signed. As the armored SUV left the command center and plunged into the darkness of the underground tunnel, silence fell over them. Not tension exactly, but the gravity of what had not been said. A kind of ongoing history, heavy as a legacy unwashed. Halfway up to the surface, Veronica's phone rang. Unknown number. She picked up. Director Ellison. It's Judge Harlan Bixby, an old, solemn voice said from Arlington. I saw the video. You handled it, with a calmness that most people don't have. I just wanted you to know, some of us saw it. Thank you, Veronica said, her voice barely hiding her exhaustion. And if it matters, my nephew just said you were the first government official he truly respected. The words made her choke. Finally, she let out a breath, her first real breath in hours. It's more important than you know, she whispered, and ended the call, still looking out the window at the growing darkness. Outside, the night was as still as ever. But inside, something had changed. She was no longer alone. Back at the airport security center, where things were spinning like a storm. DHS had sealed off the area around Gate 37. Reporters were held back behind barricades. The airport spokesperson was frantically delivering prepared statements, sweat beading on his forehead. In the interrogation room, Devon paced like a caged animal. His hands clenched and unclenched. Landry sat in the opposite corner, holding his head in his hands. You think I'm done for? Landry asked quietly. Devon didn't answer. Just then, the door opened. A federal investigator walked in, no introduction, no look, just a steely voice. You're both suspended, effective immediately. She set 2 sealed files on the table. Your badges and weapons will be confiscated. During the investigation, you are not to speak to the media, nor are you to have any contact with the director. Landry nodded, silently. Devon just curled his lips, but said nothing. You'll have your chance to tell your side of the story, she continued. But let me be clear, this isn't going away. She gave them one last look. The woman you disrespected is not only the director of the FBI, but a public servant who has faced more terrorists than you've ever completed. No one said anything more. Back in the SUV, Veronica sat motionless. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from her goddaughter in Florida. Hey. I saw it. You did it right. I'm proud. She pursed her lips, tilting her head back toward the cold glass. It wasn't the end. But maybe, another beginning. Setting, Columbia University, main hall, where Veronica had studied. She decided to speak not from the powerful podium of the FBI, but from where her memories began, among the students, faculty, and former colleagues, and those who had never believed her. She looked up, catching sight of Sonia standing by the broken glass windows in the afternoon sun. I'm so proud of you, Veronica, Sonia said, as softly as a wish. Don't let them hurt you. It's not that you're not good enough, it's that they're not ready for you. Veronica closed her eyes. In the darkness behind them were hundreds of stares, voices of doubt, and an evening of handcuffs. When she opened them again, she nodded. Schedule a meeting. Tomorrow morning. Here. Here. The great room. Columbia. And the statement. I'll write it myself. But what Veronica was about to say wasn't for the press. But for the 17-year-old girl who had been kicked out of class for asking too many questions. For the mother who sat crying in the courthouse hallway that year in a cotton jacket. And for everyone who had been taught to be silent to survive. The next morning, 9 o'clock sharp. There was no sign of the FBI. No flags. No live cameras, but there was light. Light streamed through the large glass ceiling of Columbia Hall, casting Veronica's silhouette on a small stage, in front of a row of students, independent journalists, and pensive faces. No one had asked her to speak. She had come. There was no backdrop of power. She wore a dark charcoal wool dress, straight collar, standing shoulders. No microphone, no prompter. Just a bottle of water and a blank sheet of paper. "We're not wasting time." Her voice rang out like a knife cutting through the still air. "You've seen the footage. Last night, I was arrested at Newark Airport. By 2 uniformed officers. I was questioned. Handcuffed. Even though I showed my badge. Even though I said my name." Her hand rested on the podium. Not shaking. Not squeezing. Just a touch, to remind her that she was really there. "This isn't the first time. It probably won't be the last. But this time, I will not be silent." No one stirred. No camera clicked. No pen touched paper. We live in a society where a black woman, wearing a suit, walking with her back straight, is seen as a threat before she's seen as a human being. She paused. "I don't want revenge. I don't want them to be stigmatized. I want them to be educated. I want the system that trained them, to stop instilling fear into serving people who don't look like them." A voice asked from the middle row. "Do you want an apology?" Veronica looked over, her gaze not hard, just tired. "Sorry" doesn't wipe the handcuffs off my wrists. Doesn't wipe the eyes of the 8-year-old who cried as she watched me being dragged away. Sorry doesn't change anything, if it's not followed by action. Another student raised her hand. "So what do you want?" "Change. Not in small ways, not 2 new manuals, not a training session. I didn't come here to break a few links. I came to melt the chain." As she walked off the stage, she didn't wait for applause. She didn't need it. She needed them to remember. The next day, the Justice Department, an unmarked conference room. 2 officers walked in, no longer armed, no longer arrogant. Veronica had asked for a private meeting. No press. No director. No lawyer. Just a long table, 3 chairs. She didn't sit in the middle. She sat across from them. Back straight. Hands in front of her. "This isn't an interrogation," she said. "I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to understand." Devon sat bolt upright in the hard wooden chair, his arms crossed over his chest. His gaze was fixed on the table, as if he concentrated hard enough, time would pass more quickly. Beside him, Landry looked like he hadn't slept all night, his eyes were bloodshot, his eyes were dark, his jaw was set as if he were trying to contain an unspoken apology. The door opened. Veronica entered. She was shirtless, wearing only a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, and she held a thin file. There was no hurry or anger in her stride, just cold certainty. She didn't sit down. "Let's talk," she said, her voice even and sharp as a razor. Devon and Landry exchanged a quick glance, as if trying to predict what was coming next. "I didn't come here to yell," she continued, "I don't need to make a big deal out of it. But I want you to understand, really understand, what you did yesterday." She opened the file, pulled out a faded photo. "This is me, 30 years old. My first day at Quantico. Then another. And this is after my first arrest." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And this," she paused, flipping to the last photo, "is my father. A civil rights lawyer. He believes the system can change. She looked at them, her eyes piercing their defenses. And yesterday, you told him, by the way you treated me, that he was wrong. Landry bowed his head. Devon swallowed. You think I'm a threat, because I don't match your image of authority. But power doesn't have a color. It doesn't speak in a certain tone. And it doesn't wear a uniform to please anyone. Silence. Heavy as a storm before rain. Veronica took a deep breath, closing the file. You made a choice. Not because of facts, but because of assumptions. And if you've chosen to wear a badge, it's not enough to be human. You have to rise above your instincts. You have to be better. She turned and walked away. Minutes later, the hall fell into absolute silence. But Veronica's lesson resonated far longer than any public reprimand. By afternoon, headlines were all over the news. FBI director gets straight at reform workshop. The clip of her speech was played over and over again, not because of her voice, but because of the weight of her composure. Veronica didn't talk to the press, didn't appear on talk shows, didn't become a media icon. But the Justice Department announced, a new training program, led by her, would be rolled out nationwide. A quiet revolution began. In the days that followed, she received hundreds of thank you notes. But she kept only one, handwritten, without a return address. Director Ellison. I watched the conference. I am a retired cop, white, from Ohio. All my life I believed that racism was someone else's business. When you spoke that day, I was not angry. I was ashamed. I will spend the rest of my life becoming the man I thought I was. Thank you. Veronica put the letter in her desk drawer. No one knew, no one needed to know. Meanwhile, Devon and Landry were reassigned, forced to undergo mandatory evaluations. The press stopped mentioning them. But their names remained. In the quiet conversations about change, her name was seared into the public memory. Ellison, no longer a name, it was a symbol. After her stirring speech at a congressional hearing, Landry had asked to join the agency's new pilot training program, teaming up with Devon. But Veronica knew, their paths were diverging, even before they'd said it. She was somewhere else now, inside a juvenile detention facility. A sharing session organized by a rehabilitation organization. She sat at a cold metal table, across from a row of young faces, grim and wary. Sonia, the security chief, walked in. Team ready. Veronica stood. No business dress, no heels. Just jeans, a black leather jacket, and a gaze that didn't shy away from anyone. She entered the dormitory, where about 15 teenagers were scattered. Some glared at her. Others stared, as if waiting for her to make a mistake and get rid of her presence. A boy with shaggy hair and tattoos dotted around his neck smirked. You came here to tell us we can be FBI agents? Veronica looked at him, her eyes neither cold nor spiteful. Just calm. No, she said. I came here to remind you that you still have the right to redefine yourself. There was no dogma. No prepared speech. Just her voice, steady but deep as an underground stream. I made them see me. Not the image they created, the real me, standing here, breathing, making mistakes, and getting up. And that was enough to change everything. The room grew quiet. A girl with braided hair asked softly, so, if you were misunderstood like us, why didn't you give up? Veronica replied, because I know the world will always try to shrink you down to fit you into a box they can handle. But you're not a box. You're a flame. Someone raised their hand to take a photo with them. Veronica was a little surprised, but nodded. As they stood side by side, a boy whispered, my mother was wrongly arrested. You make me think, maybe there's still a place for someone like her. Veronica put her hand on his shoulder, tell her I'm grateful she's still here. Still herself. After everyone had left, she stayed in the empty room for a long time. Her hand lightly touched the old leather briefcase, the one that had fallen to the airport floor on her first day at work. The briefcase was still there, but she was not. She returned home late, the lights were off in the office. Only her desk lamp was still on. She sat, her coat slung over the back of her chair, her reading glasses pushed down her nose. Her eyes lingered on the black and white frame, Veronica, 23, standing on the steps of Quantico. Her mother had called that day, crying into the phone. "You really did it." Veronica hadn't cried then. She'd been too busy proving it wasn't just luck. But now, sitting in the silence, she remembered the feeling, the hallways, the name Ellison ringing like a challenge, the cheap shoes, the trust no one had given her, the one she had to earn. But today, she wasn't fighting just for herself. Now, the lesson wasn't hers alone. It belonged to anyone brave enough to listen. Each year passed like a silent river, and there were nights when she wondered, was all this sacrifice worth it? Late at night, after exhausting meetings, she drove back to her high-rise apartment in the middle of the city. She took off her high heels like a mask. She didn't go into the living room, didn't turn on the lights, she sat down on the cold wooden floor, her back against the door. She needed to touch the ground, to remind herself that she was still real. No one saw the small cracks in her voice when she had to hold back tears in the middle of a tense meeting. No one saw the way her hands clenched when someone questioned her abilities, not because they were right, but because they refused to accept that she had surpassed them long ago. But she didn't react. She remembered. Not to retaliate. To survive. When her phone buzzed, a reminder for a 6:45 a.m. meeting with the task force, she frowned. Then she opened the bottom drawer of her desk. Inside were the first files she'd ever worked, a string of missing persons cases in Nevada, a busted human trafficking ring in El Paso that no one believed she could run, until she did. And at the bottom, pressed flat like a vow never to be forgotten, was the letter her father had written the day she'd been named deputy director. "They will test you. They will ask how you got here. Make them wonder why they thought you couldn't do it." She read it a second time. No tears. No weakness. Just a little more determination. She didn't need the spotlight. She didn't do it for glory. And she didn't need permission to be herself. But sometimes, in the empty room, amid the hum of fluorescent lights and the whistling of the wind outside the 18th floor window, she allowed herself to remember. Not to lament. But to engrave in her heart, what had been taken from so many women like her, in silence. And by remaining, not retreating, she made her presence impossible to ignore. At 11:18 p.m., she stood. Put on her coat. Turned off the lights. Locked the door. The long hallway was silent. Her boots clicked firmly on the marble. When the elevator doors closed behind her, she let out a breath, not a sigh, but the letting go of someone who knew she had lived right. She didn't laugh. She didn't cry. She just stood there, shoulders square, head held high. The FBI director. And this time, no one could take that away from her. Not because of what they saw at the airport, in the newspapers, in the hearings. But because of what she did next. That's what history will remember.